Hey, I've noticed that this milestone's taking a little bit longer than we thought it would. I'm going to bring it to the group proactively. Do not wait until you have missed a checkpoint to tell them you're going to miss a checkpoint. If the first time a stakeholder group finds out something is wrong is after the wrong thing has happened, you are too late. Too late. This is a good rule of thumb in like any type of corporate environment, your boss, your projects, your work, anything. But if you start to see, hey, I'm getting a lot of pushback from this team, they're not getting me the data as fast as I wanted, it's going to slow down our delivery. That goes to the stakeholder group. Hey, just want to loop everyone in. We're having some delays getting data from this particular group. Right now, we're about 3 days behind schedule on the first milestone. We're hoping to get caught up, but wanted to bring it to this group's attention in case we end up missing that first date. It's a little bit of an escalation. It's not a red flag. It's not a we're on fire. It is a like, hey, I want you guys to know this potential risk exists. The reason it is important to do this is because if you wait and you miss that milestone, and let's say we miss it by 3 days, and we schedule the meeting, and somebody goes, well, why did we miss the date? And you go, well, we couldn't get data from this team. Now it sounds like you're making excuses. It sounds like you didn't manage the project very well and you fell behind. The other benefit of raising risks early is if one of the stakeholders needs to get involved to put pressure on that team, now you've got an advocate going, hey, dude, get Kendall her data. And now we're back on track. Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Career Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden, and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know that they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtains and some tips and tricks to ultimately make you successful in your career and help you progress a little bit faster. So today has been a very highly requested episode. I have had multiple people message me and ask if I could do an episode on this topic. So I'm really excited. Today, we are going to talk about what it takes to manage a project. So as we jump in, few things to note. I am not a project manager. Okay. I do not have a PMI certification. I did not study project management. I don't have a master's degree in it. I'm just Kendall. And as you guys are used to on this podcast, I just kind of tell it like it is and what I've seen work and what I've seen not work. So if you're listening to this and you are a professional project manager and you're like, but Kendall, you didn't mention XYZ thing that we have to do from a bureaucratic perspective. Awesome. This is my version. Cool? Fabulous. So a couple of things to know. If you're interested in project management, it's not your job, but you want to get better at it. There are things I cover in my program. You're welcome to schedule a call with the team. Make sure it's going to be the right fit for you. There are PMI certifications that you can take. Also, if you are tech adjacent, I recommend an agile methodology certification rather than just a PMI. So take that for what it's worth. Grain of salt. We're going to jump in. So we'll start with just the existential. What does it mean to manage a project? Okay. In my opinion, there are 3 main parts to project management. The first piece is delivering on expectations. This means that you have to establish expectations. This means you have to have metrics to measure if things are successful. Even if those metrics are binary, like yes, no, this got completed. It means following through on the expectations of the people who assign the work to you to make sure that they are fulfilled. Okay? Expectation setting and achievement is the first big chunk. The second one is stakeholder management. This is the part that gives project management a bad rep because it's a lot of babysitting. Getting a project done is a lot of babysitting. That is applicable whether you are a project manager or you just manage projects. Okay? Getting any type of work done in your career is going to take a lot of babysitting. I always joke with individuals who work with me that like most of my career is being able to babysit effectively. If you can do that, you will crush it. Okay. So first piece is expectation setting and achievement. Second piece is stakeholder management and babysitting. And then the last piece is just frankly documentation. Are we documenting the things that are happening, the things that need to happen, and are we communicating it out in an effective way? Okay. Those are the 3 main pieces of project management. High level, high level. If you're listening to this and you're like, but Kendall, I don't manage projects. I am a developer. I don't manage projects. I am an accountant. I don't manage projects. You manage projects. Okay. There are 2, Kendall Berg opinion, 2 universal skills that apply to any and every job. The first is project management. The second is sales. Okay. We could do a whole separate episode on the sales skill set. Maybe we will this year. It's something that also gets asked about a whole heck of a lot. But if you have a job, you are in sales and you are selling to your company your value. You are selling to them why keeping you on the payroll is worth their investment. You are selling to them why you deserve that promotion. You are selling to them why the work you've done is correct. If you have a job, you are in sales. For the individuals who scoff at that and turn up their nose and say, I would never do sales, you're doing it, whether you want to or not. If you own a business, if you have a job, if you leave your house, you are in sales. If you've been in a relationship, I sell my husband on why this vacation is a good idea all the time. Okay, you're in sales. Just accept it, learn to love it, give yourself a hug if it's causing like emotional turmoil. You'll be fine. Maybe we'll do a whole episode on sales. Maybe I will. We'll see how I feel after this. So project management, no matter your job, you are managing a project because your work has some amount of expectations. It has some amount of stakeholders and it requires some amount of documentation, no matter what your job is. I want you to think about that. Just take a second, meditate with it, sit with it. Project management is a skill in and of itself. That's why so many organizations have project managers. All right? It truly is. Every company on the planet at some point hires project managers, and it's to help them oversee these projects. It is because most people suck at it. Now, I have lots of employees who are project managers. I've worked with really great PMO organizations. I am a firm believer that the PMO adds a lot of value. Project management organization adds a lot of value. I totally think so. That being said, I believe if the average employee was better at project management, there are very few projects big enough that you have to hire a project manager. There are projects big enough, projects that cross multiple verticals, that are interacting with lots of different teams, that require tons of stakeholder management, that are really high cost investment. There is definitely a need for PMs. What I'm saying is that if most people were better at project management, there is a ton of small stuff that we could just get done. And in the true scrappy way that I like to work, I'd rather just get stuff done. So that's why, as somebody who has worked in data science, who has worked in analytics, who has worked in tech, I think project management is one of the best skills you bring to an organization, whether it's in your title or not. So how do we do this then? You're like, Kendall, that was great. Totally aligned. Agree with you. I need to get better at this. How do I manage a project? Step 1, set expectations. It sounds simple. And half of you guys are in your cars, on your commute, going back into the office, even though you don't want to, and you're rolling your eyes because you're like, Kendall, come on, duh. But I bet you don't do it. Bet you don't do it. Okay. Whenever you are assigned any type of new work with any type of new scope, if your manager does not proactively set expectations with you, you need to request them. What does success look like in this project, right? There are projects where success is not actually the thing going well. The success is, hey, we implemented it. We may implement it and decide we hate it. That's fine too, right? What does success look like for this project? What KPIs, OKRs, pick an acronym do you want to measure to make sure that this is successful? What metrics do we need to be able to track? What are the business requirements? Now, business requirements may come from a different stakeholder, right? So if your manager comes to you, we're going to make up a project for this example, and they're like, Kendall, I want you to implement a new software. This could or could not be applicable to your job. Roll with it. This could be implement a new campaign. This could be build a new operations process. This could be hire elephants to dance the go-go at our event coming up. Literally don't care. Okay. But for this example, you're implementing a software. Great. Thank you. Okay. So your boss comes to you and says, hey, I want you to implement a software. And you say, great. What does success look like in this? And they go, well, I just told you to implement the software. And you say, yes, but does success mean that the software was implemented? Does it mean that it's implemented and it meets all the business requirements? Does it mean it's implemented and we choose to like it and we're going to continue working with it? We need specifics. Okay. What does success look like? What metrics are we tracking? We're tracking efficiency gain. The reason we're implementing this system is because it's going to make us work faster. We are tracking revenue growth. We're implementing the system because it's going to generate us more money, right? We are tracking risk aversion. We're implementing the system because it's going to decrease the likelihood that we fail an audit. Okay. Why are we doing it? What are we measuring? Expectation, measurement, business requirements. What are all the things a system has to have? Okay. Now your boss may not have the answers to that last question. That might be something where you say, hey, who are my key stakeholders that I'm going to be engaging with on this project? And you may go to them and say, hey, what are your requirements? What are your requirements? What are your requirements? And you may be combining and consolidating requirements across multiple different groups. Okay. If you work in data analytics, tech, if you work in, frankly, marketing campaigns, this is something, okay, side note. I have a lot of clients in marketing. It's a real tense area to work in. Okay. So often people will come to me and they're like, well, I'm just running a campaign. I'm like, you're not just anything. Why are you running a campaign? What's the point? Who's your stakeholder? Who's the campaign for? Who's the end client? What are we measuring? And they're like, oh, I don't know any of that. I'm like, well, then you're not running a campaign very well, right? It's a project. Okay. Who are your stakeholders? What are your business requirements? Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're finding the information on this podcast helpful and you're looking to take control of your career and start to elevate yourself to the next level, go ahead and check out our course. Go to bit.ly/career coach course to get signed up today and to start taking your career to the next level and navigate the secrets of the career game. So your first job when you get a project is to make sure all the expectations are clear. And then you're going to document them. Okay, we're jumping to number 3, but we're going to come back. Okay, you're going to document all of those expectations, right? That is step 1. Mistake I see people make when they make a project is they start looking at the data, they start testing the system, they start doing demos, but they haven't set expectations. They haven't documented their business requirement. They don't know what success looks like. They haven't figured out what metrics they need to measure. They haven't documented their process, which we're going to get to in a minute. And they just jump into doing the thing and then it fails and they're like, well, I don't know why. This is why. Okay. Step 1, we're going to document and create all of our expectations. Step 1. Step 2 is your process. So this is part of expectation setting and part documentation. This is the second biggest mistake that I see people make, specifically in any type of analytics or any type of technology, any type of like highly technical work. We often jump into analyzing the data, coming up with solutions, ideating long before we've documented what we think the process should be. So one of the biggest game changers, if you're managing a project, is how should the process work? The process that's being replaced by the system, the process that's being fulfilled by the campaign, the process that is being followed in operations. Like, doesn't matter what it is. Again, what is the process? Okay, so we're implementing this system. Let's say that this system is a budget management tool. Okay, how does creating the budget work? What are all the steps? Who all is involved? How does that flow? How does maintaining the budget work? What are all the steps? Who's involved? What does forecasting the budget look like? What are all the steps? Who's involved? Right? Document your process. Because when you take the time to write out that whole process, yes, it is tedious. Yes, it's not super fun unless you're me, because I love that. But if it's not for you, just do it, because you're going to look at that process and you're going to go, oh my gosh, a system could help us here. A system could help us here. A system could help us here. It could help us here. This would be so much better. Right? Or you look at the process and you go, I don't think this campaign's the right one at all. It's not going to do what we're asking it to do. It will save you so much rework to document the process upstream. Set your expectations. Document your process. Right? It's first 2 steps in project management. Then we're going to get into stakeholders. At this point, you should already have crafted a stakeholder list because you need them to get your business requirements. You need them to validate your process. If you have not for some reason, because maybe you are the stakeholder and you have the business requirements and you are the whole group. Great. Now you're going to document your stakeholders and you're going to set up a meeting. So most companies, your company might be different, call these steercos, right? Steering committees of like, who are all the stakeholders who need to be aware of what's happening in this project, who are going to weigh in, who are going to offer their opinion, who are going to tell you something's going well. Set those up on a recurring basis, whether that is monthly, whether that is weekly in the beginning and shifts to monthly later, depends on the project type. Your stakeholder group, your steerco group, is different than your working group. I'm going to say it one more time. Your stakeholder group is different than your working group. In your working group, we go, oh my gosh, is this going to work? What about this? Has anybody tested this? And I'm wondering if this is going to break this part of the process. What do we all think? That is a working group. Do not go to your stakeholders with that kind of stuff. Your stakeholders are the executives, the leaders, the managers who need to be aware of what's happening, who have opinions on what's happening, but who are not doing any work. Stakeholder group, working group. Okay. So once you have your stakeholder group established and you've documented your expectations, you've documented your process, you're going to have a big kickoff. And in that big kickoff, you're going to go, hey guys, here's the expectations. Is everybody in agreement? Is everybody aligned? This is what we're trying to achieve. This is how we're going to measure it. This is what success looks like. A lot of the times this will also include a RACI. A RACI is a personal favorite document of mine, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Who are all the people who need to be all of those things for all the different things you're doing? I love a good RACI. I'm a personal RACI hog. I'll make them for everything, but it's not required. So you're going to go through all of that with your stakeholder group. Hey, are we all agreed before we even start working? This is the plan. Then you're going to take that, you're going to go back to your working group, and you're going to come up with what the roadmap looks like. What are the milestones? How long is this going to take? When are we going to have something to share out? When are we going to have a final solution to share out? And you're going to work your way back into little milestones. Okay. Third big mistake I see when people are managing projects is you don't have checkpoints, especially if you are junior and you are managing a project. It is really common that you take the project, you're like, okay, I know what I need to do. I've got my expectations, I've got my process, I've talked to all my stakeholders. I'm just going to go do the thing. And like 6 months go by and then you come back and you're like, ta-da, I did it. And then there's something wrong with it. Okay. Checkpoints, 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 right? What this means is, hey, I've reviewed my documentation. That's checkpoint 1. All right. I've created my roadmap and my timeline. That's checkpoint 2. Are we all agreed that this is feasible? Checkpoint 3 is, hey, we've got a POC, a first version of the system implemented, proof of concept, and we want to review it with the group. Make sure that we're not missing anything. Okay. First checkpoint. We do some testing, we do some adjustments, and then we have an MVP, minimum viable product. Yes, proof of concept and MVP may be very similar. Timeline might not be super far between the two, but minimum viable product. Then we take that back to the group. How do we think about this? Right? It is checkpoints to iterate. It is important that you communicate these checkpoints at the beginning of the project. The reason being, if you go to them and you have not communicated that you're having checkpoints and you take them a proof of concept, they are going to assume it is a final product. It is not a final product. This is a sync up. This is an update. This is a milestone check-in. We are not done yet. It's important to communicate that upstream because that way if people have feedback, they feel like they're part of the process rather than, oh, Kendall brought this product, but it's wrong. We don't want them to feel like you did the wrong thing. We want them to feel like they're helping you do the right thing. Mental shift. Okay. So we set those checkpoints, then we hit those checkpoints, ideally. Okay. As you are going along in your project, there are a few different types of communication to your stakeholders that need to take place. So one is the milestone updates that we've already kind of talked about. Hey, we need to make sure we're hitting our milestones. We're taking those milestones back to the group. We're syncing up. We're iterating. We're working together. Okay. The second type is risk communication. Hey, I've noticed that this milestone's taking a little bit longer than we thought it would. I'm going to bring it to the group proactively. Do not wait until you have missed a checkpoint to tell them you're going to miss a checkpoint. If the first time a stakeholder group finds out something is wrong is after the wrong thing has happened, you are too late. Too late. It's a good rule of thumb in like any type of corporate environment, your boss, your projects, your work, anything. But if you start to see, hey, I'm getting a lot of pushback from this team, they're not getting me the data as fast as I wanted, it's going to slow down our delivery. That goes to the stakeholder group. Hey, just want to loop everyone in. We're having some delays getting data from this particular group. Right now, we're about 3 days behind schedule on the first milestone. We're hoping to get caught up, but wanted to bring it to this group's attention in case we end up missing that first date. It's a little bit of an escalation. It's not a red flag. It's not a we're on fire. It is a like, hey, I want you guys to know this potential risk exists. The reason it is important to do this is because if you wait and you miss that milestone, and let's say we miss it by 3 days, and we schedule the meeting, and somebody goes, well, why did we miss the date? And you go, well, we couldn't get data from this team. Now it sounds like you're making excuses. It sounds like you didn't manage the project very well and you fell behind. The other benefit of raising risks early is if one of the stakeholders needs to get involved to put pressure on that team, now you've got an advocate going, hey, dude, get Kendall her data. And now we're back on track, right? Raise risks early. So communications are milestones. They are risk awareness. They are CYA, cover your attitude. CYAs are similar to risks, but post-mortem. So we communicated, hey, there's a risk. This team hasn't gotten us data that we need. This is putting us about 3 days behind schedule. Just wanted everyone to be aware. Then we are 3 days behind schedule and we CYA. Hey, we're really excited to celebrate this milestone. As I had previously communicated, getting data was delayed because of the system of record, whatever the reason is. Do not name call. But hey, the reason is this of why we were delayed. I do feel we can make this time up in the future, but wanted it clearly communicated that this is what happened. Okay, CYA, cover, postmortem, right? And then the last is, where are we tracking to our expectations? You should have a mechanism in place to constantly be refreshing your stakeholders if we are on track to meet the expectations that we established at the beginning of the project. Because if at any point we start to realize like, oop, we're not going to get this thing, or oop, this business requirement's not going to get met, or oop, this metric's trending low, we go back to risk, we go back to CYA communication, right? So how are we tracking to our expectations? What progress are we making? How is that going? Okay, so that all falls under that stakeholder management. The last piece is documentation. And I've kind of touched on documentation because it's really interwoven with the other two, but your primary protection as a project manager is documentation. things written in emails, things written in slides, things documented in an SOP. When you are managing a project where there are lots of stakeholders, PMs complain to me all the time, like, but it's not my fault. I don't actually do this piece. This other person does, and they're holding it up. Or like, I don't actually implement this thing. This other group does, but they're holding it up. This is why documentation and effective stakeholder management is so important. Because if you are communicating milestones, if you are warning them when risks happen, if you are CYAing after the part, and if you are tracking all of this in a document that says, how are we tracking to expectations, to timeline, to budget, to roadmap? How are all these things flowing? If you are completing that triangle, your project will be successful. Your job will be successful, even if the project fails. So this is the caveat of project management of any type of project. A lot of this depends on the culture of your company. But for me, I'm not so worried if a project doesn't go well. Like, projects don't go well all the time, right? And I was talking with a COO, this was months ago, and he was talking about how like sometimes he'll go to somebody and be like, I want to do this thing. And halfway through the project, somebody will come to him and they're like, this is stupid. This is like a huge waste of resources. This is a huge waste of money. This is not going to get you what you want. Like, we're pulling the plug. And he's like, okay, great. If you have a good culture in your company, it is okay to decide during a project that it's not the right solution, or that it's not the right project, or it's not the right process or campaign or whatever. If you are in a bad, toxic culture, they'll probably make you finish the project anyways. And that's when we're going to introduce optionality, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But it is okay if your project does not have the desired outcome if you managed the project effectively end to end. I will make up a fake example. You hire someone to run a report and you're like, hey, you have to build this report from scratch. If you hire that person and you don't hear from them for 6 months and then they come back to you and they're like, hey, the report's not going to work, you're probably super pissed. That person's probably getting a low review and or fired, right? But if you hire somebody to run that report and they document all the business requirements and review it with you, and they set clear expectations and metrics of how they're going to measure their success, and they check in with you every month with an update of how the report is going, where they've got data, where there are inconsistencies, any risks they see, and they get to the end of the 6 months and they say, hey, we've done a lot of good work, but unfortunately, I just don't think this report's the right solution. We want to explore this other option. You probably think that person's a rock star. Why? Because they managed project effectively. They set expectations, they managed their stakeholders, and they documented it. That is the key, right? Now, the quick side note to this, and I've talked about this on other podcasts. This is something I talk about all the time with my clients. What do you do when we think a project is the wrong idea, or we get halfway through a project and we realize it's the wrong idea, or we're asked to do a solution, we think there's a better solution, right? What do we do when we disagree? Happens all the time, right? Okay, what do we do when we disagree? Optionality. This is your key. I wish when I was coming out of college that somebody had been like, never disagree with an executive, provide options. Would have saved me so much heartache. It is so much easier to go to your CEO and go, or your boss, or your coworker, or your stakeholder, fill in the blank executive level that scares you, and say, hey, I know you asked for A. I've provided 3 different options. One is A, one is C, which is what I think works the best, and B is kind of a hybrid approach between the two. And I'd be curious, seeing the costs of this, the benefits of this, the speed in which we can deliver this, did you still want to pursue A? 90% of the time, in my experience, if you go to leadership with options, even if option A is what they wanted and you're recommending option C, I swear 80 to 90% of the time, they'll be like, oh, okay, I see why you recommend option C. That makes sense. Now, they may not pick option C. They might say, hey, I get why you want to do that. We're still going to do option A. And maybe it's because we have a pre-existing contract with them, or maybe it's because it came down from even higher and they don't have the ability to push back, or maybe it's an investor request or something bizarre that happens. So you have to go with option A. Fine. At least then you've expressed your opinion, your perspective. That way, if the project does crash and burn, again, going back to documentation, and we get to the end and we go, oops, yep, we definitely should have done C. We could be like, hey, remember when we talked about that? You said you wanted to do A. Yeah, it turns out we're going to have to do C. Right? Now we've got some air cover. No, we never say I told you so. Never, ever, 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 ever in corporate say I told you so. Don't do that. Even if your I told you so is wrapped up in a see my aforementioned email, don't do that. Okay. It is okay to bring those options back and say, hey, we explored option A. It doesn't look like it's going to work. Did you have a preference between B or C? Totally cool. Totally cool to revisit that. We do not say I told you so. All right. Just don't get yourself fired and then say Kendall's project management episode told me to say that I disagree and then to argue about it. Don't do that. Okay. So These are the big pieces for managing a successful project. Set your expectations, business requirements, what does success look like? Manage your stakeholders effectively. Risk communication, CYA communication, expectation communication, right? And then make sure that you're documenting everything. And then when you do disagree, because at some point something's going to happen in this project where you're like, whoop, we need to pivot, or I don't like this, optionality. Save yourself the heartache, come with options. One of those options might be stupid, but at least you can show, hey, I did think about a bunch of options. And quick caveat here, the big thing that I hear people say when I'm talking about optionality is they're like, well, I thought about all those options, but they were dumb. And option A is the only option that makes sense. Cool. Show them the dumb options. At least one or two of them. Because what happens when a leader is shown like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, they're like, well, did we think about this? Did we think about this? Did we think about this? Doesn't matter how great you are. They want to know what the context was. What was the back work? What was the foundation that built that solution? And it's way harder to get buy-in if we only take one thing. It is much easier to get buy-in if we say, hey, we thought about these 3 options. We're recommending this one, but it's up to you. You're much more likely to get what you want. Also, when you take options, don't take 50. Be reasonable. 3 or less. 3 or less. Okay? Rule of threes. I did a whole separate podcast episode on that, but like rule of threes. 3 or less. Awesome. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. If you want to learn more about project management, like I mentioned to you guys, there's certifications out there that I like. You're welcome to work with me in my program, get some more hands-on support. But ultimately, you are managing projects in your job. Make sure you are doing it effectively. Awesome. If you love today's episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars. If you have any questions or thoughts, leave them in the comments below. We'll get back to you. Otherwise, we'll be back next week with another great episode. And thank you again for checking in to Secrets of the Career Game.